Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today, we're going to discover the emotional final chapter of Diep's story, where a mother who disappeared for 20 years prepares to leave once again, until one heartbreaking sentence from little Nee changes everything forever. Will Diep finally forgive the woman who abandoned her, or will this family lose each other one more time? If you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with tears, hidden truths, and powerful reunions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. The storm outside had finally begun to weaken, but inside the small countryside house, the emotional damage only continued growing deeper. Rainwater still dripped steadily from the roof, while cold wind slipped through the bamboo walls, carrying the smell of wet soil into the room. No one spoke for a long time after Mr. Huan revealed fragments of the truth from 20 years earlier. The silence felt unbearable. Diep stood near the table, with tears still covering her face, trying desperately to process everything at once. Across from her, Lan looked emotionally exhausted, while Mr. Huan remained seated quietly, like a man slowly collapsing beneath the weight of his own past. Only Nee seemed unaware of the full tragedy surrounding the room. The little girl sat silently beside the blankets, watching the adults with nervous eyes. Finally, Diep broke the silence. "You both decided my entire life without asking me," she whispered. Neither Lan nor Mr. Huan answered, because she was right. Diep laughed softly under her breath, but there was no happiness inside the sound. "All these years," she continued, "I kept wondering why my mother abandoned me." Her breathing became uneven again, and now I find out everyone knew the truth except me. Lan immediately shook her head through tears. "I wanted to tell you." "When?" Diep snapped suddenly. "After another 20 years. The pain inside her voice hit Lan like a knife. Mr. Hon slowly stood from his chair. "Diep, your mother suffered too." Diep immediately turned toward him. "Don't defend her." But the moment those words left her mouth, guilt briefly crossed her expression, because despite everything, seeing Lan cry still hurt her emotionally. That confusion only made her feel worse. Lan noticed it immediately. Very slowly, she stepped closer. "I know you can't forgive me," she whispered, "but every day without you was punishment already." Diep looked away instantly. She could not bear hearing those words right now. For years, she imagined screaming at her mother if they ever met again. She imagined anger, hatred, accusations. But now that the moment had finally arrived, the reality felt far more painful than she expected, because part of her still wanted the woman standing in front of her to be innocent somehow. But innocence no longer existed anywhere inside this story. The room fell silent again until Mr. Huan quietly spoke. "There's still something you don't know." Lan immediately looked toward him sharply. "Stop," she warned, but Mr. Huan shook his head slowly. "She deserves the full truth." Fear crossed Lan's face for the first time that night, because she already knew where the conversation was heading. Diep stared between both of them in confusion. What truth? Mr. Han exhaled heavily before answering. "The reason your mother disappeared wasn't only because of fear." Lan closed her eyes tightly, but Mr. Han continued anyway. Back then, after you were born, my family threatened to take everything away from her. Diep's expression slowly changed. What do you mean? Mr. Han rubbed his forehead tiredly. My parents believed Lan would destroy our family reputation. They wanted the relationship to disappear completely. Lan's tears returned immediately. They told me if I stayed, she whispered, your life would become worse. Diep remained frozen. Mr. Huan continued speaking quietly, his voice filled with regret. They threatened custody, money, everything. Lan lowered her head. I thought leaving would protect you from growing up inside that nightmare. But I still grew up alone, Diep whispered. The sentence shattered the room emotionally again. Lan began crying harder, because no explanation could erase that truth. Suddenly, Ni quietly walked across the room and held Diep's hand. The little girl looked confused and frightened after watching everyone cry for hours. Mom, she whispered softly, please don't be sad anymore. The innocence in her voice broke something inside Diep completely. She immediately pulled Ni into her arms and held her tightly. And in that moment, for the first time all night, Diep truly understood what terrified Lan 20 years earlier, the fear of losing your child. Her eyes slowly lifted toward Lan again. The older woman stood trembling near the doorway, looking smaller and more fragile than before. Not like a stranger, like a mother who had already punished herself for decades. Outside, the rain finally began weakening into soft, dripping sounds against the trees. Meanwhile, inside the house, another painful realization slowly formed inside Diep's mind. Lan had not returned for revenge. She came back because she could not survive the separation anymore. That realization softened something inside Diep emotionally, but the wounds remained far too deep to heal immediately. A few moments later, Mr. Huan quietly prepared to leave. Before walking toward the door, he stopped beside Diep. I know you hate me too, he said softly. Diep didn't answer, because honestly, she no longer understood exactly what she felt anymore. Anger, pity, confusion, exhaustion. Everything had become tangled together. Mr. Huan looked toward Lan one final time. I'm sorry, he whispered quietly, but Lan only lowered her eyes. Some apologies arrived too late to repair anything. Mr. Huan eventually disappeared into the rainy darkness outside, leaving the house buried in silence once again. Hours passed slowly after that. Nai eventually fell asleep beside Diep, while the storm outside faded into distant thunder somewhere beyond the mountains. Lan quietly sat alone near the wooden steps outside the house, staring into the darkness. She already knew what she needed to do. Even if returning had finally allowed her to see her daughter again, staying longer would only continue reopening old wounds. Inside the house, Diep noticed the empty space near the doorway and immediately stepped outside. Cold wind touched her face as she found Lan sitting alone beneath the dripping roof. Neither woman spoke at first. Then Lan finally whispered, "When the sun rises, I'll leave." Diep's chest tightened immediately. What? Lan forced a weak smile. You already suffered enough because of me. That's not your decision anymore, Diep answered quickly. But Lan slowly shook her head. I destroyed your childhood. Tears gathered again in Diep's eyes. No, she whispered painfully. The people who separated us destroyed it. Lan looked stunned after hearing that. For the first time since returning, a small, fragile hope appeared inside her eyes, but it disappeared almost immediately. Even if you forgive me, she whispered, I still can't forgive myself. The wind moved softly through the bamboo trees around them, while distant thunder faded farther away. Neither woman realized that this quiet conversation would become the final turning point before everything changed forever. The countryside slowly became quieter as the storm finally passed beyond the mountains. Water still dripped from the roof of the small wooden house, while faint mist settled across the empty fields surrounding the village. The world outside seemed peaceful again, but inside Diep's chest, nothing felt calm anymore. She stood silently near the doorway, watching Lan sit alone beneath the bamboo roof, her figure looking smaller and lonelier than ever before. When the sun rises, I'll leave. Those words continued echoing inside Diep's mind. For years she dreamed about finding her mother again. She imagined thousands of possible reunions, thousands of explanations, thousands of endings. But she never imagined finally finding her, only to lose her again a few hours later. Behind her, Ni stirred slightly in her sleep. The soft sound pulled Diep back toward reality. She slowly walked over and adjusted the blanket covering her daughter. Ni instinctively moved closer, even while sleeping, wrapping one small hand around Diep's wrist, as though afraid her mother might disappear too. That simple movement broke Diep emotionally, because suddenly she understood something terrifying. If she disappeared from Ni's life for 20 years, her daughter would carry the same pain forever. The same loneliness, the same questions, the same emptiness she spent her entire life trying to survive. Tears slowly filled Diep's eyes again. Outside, Lan quietly stood up and began gathering her small belongings near the wooden steps. She moved carefully, silently, almost like someone trying not to leave traces behind. Diep watched her for several long seconds before finally speaking. You're really leaving? Lan stopped moving. I should have left years ago, she answered softly. Diep shook her head immediately. No. Lan slowly turned toward her. Moonlight filtered faintly through the wet bamboo trees, illuminating the tears still covering both their faces. I don't know how to fix any of this, Lan whispered. Every time I look at you, all I can see are the years I lost. Diep's breathing became uneven again. You think I didn't lose them too? The question shattered the silence between them. Lan lowered her eyes immediately. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Diep slowly stepped closer. When I was little, she whispered, I used to imagine my mother would suddenly come back one day. Lan's lips trembled. I waited for footsteps outside the house every night. Tears rolled down Lan's face again. But after a while, Diep continued softly, I stopped hoping. The honesty inside her voice felt almost unbearable. Lan covered her mouth as quiet sobs shook her shoulders. I'm sorry, she whispered repeatedly. I'm so sorry. Diep stared at her silently. For years, those were the exact words she wanted to hear. But now that they had finally arrived, they still could not erase the pain completely. And yet, something inside her had already begun changing, not because the wounds disappeared, but because for the first time in her life, she could finally see the pain her mother carried too. Suddenly, movement behind them interrupted the moment. Nai stood barefoot near the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. The little girl looked confused after noticing Lan holding her bags. "Grandma," she whispered softly, "where are you going?" Lan immediately forced herself calm and crouched down beside her. "I have to leave for a little while." Ni frowned. "Why?" Lan couldn't answer, because how could she explain 20 years of guilt and regret to a child who only understood love in its simplest form? Ni looked toward Diep nervously. "Is Grandma leaving because everyone was crying?" The question hit the adults painfully. Diep slowly looked away. But before anyone could respond, Ni suddenly grabbed Lan's hand tightly. "Don't leave again." The world seemed to stop moving. Lan froze completely after hearing that word. Again. Even though the little girl didn't fully understand the truth, somehow her innocent voice carried the exact pain hidden inside the entire family. Ni's eyes slowly filled with tears. "You promised you would stay with us." Lan immediately broke down crying again, because for the second time in one night, a child had unknowingly shattered the emotional walls she spent decades building around herself. Very gently, Ni wrapped both arms around Lan's waist. "Please stay," she whispered. The sight completely destroyed Diep emotionally. For years, she believed the past only brought pain. But now, standing in front of her daughter and mother together, she suddenly realized something else too. Leaving would only continue the cycle. Another child waiting, another family broken apart, another lifetime of regret. "No," Diep whispered suddenly. Lan slowly looked up. "You're not leaving." The older woman stared at her in shock. Diep's tears continued falling, but this time her voice sounded steadier than before. "I spent 20 years without my mother," she said painfully. "I won't let Ni experience the same thing." Lan looked unable to breathe. "You don't have to forgive me," she whispered. Diep shook her head slowly. "Maybe not today." Silence filled the small yard. "But I don't want to lose you again either." That sentence shattered the final wall between them. Lan collapsed emotionally, crying harder than before while covering her face with trembling hands. And for the first time since childhood, Diep slowly stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother. The moment felt fragile, painful, broken, but real. Lan held her daughter tightly, as though terrified this reunion might disappear if she loosened her grip even slightly. Nearby, Nai smiled through tears before hugging both of them together. The 3 generations remained standing beneath the dripping bamboo roof, while the last traces of rain slowly faded around them. Far away near the road outside the village, Mr. Hoan sat alone inside his parked car, watching the faint light coming from the house. He could not hear the conversation, but somehow he already understood what had happened. A tired sadness crossed his face. For years he believed controlling the truth would protect everyone. Instead, it destroyed the people he loved most. Slowly, he lowered his eyes and whispered quietly to himself, "I was too late." As dawn finally began rising over the countryside, Soft sunlight spread across the wet fields surrounding the small wooden house. Inside the yard, Diep prepared breakfast quietly, while Ni sat beside Lan, showing her old drawings and school notebooks one by one. Lan listened to every story carefully, smiling through lingering tears. Simple moments, ordinary moments. The kind of moments she once believed she would never have again. Nearby, Diep occasionally glanced toward her mother while preparing food. The pain between them had not disappeared overnight. Some wounds would take years to heal. But for the first time, healing finally felt possible. The final scene slowly pulled away from the small countryside house, surrounded by bamboo trees and morning light. 3 generations remained together beneath the quiet sunrise, not because the past had been erased, but because love finally became stronger than the silence that once separated them forever. After the painful truth about the past is finally revealed, Diep struggles to accept that Lan is truly the mother who disappeared from her life 20 years earlier. While old wounds and resentment continue tearing the family apart, Mr. Huan admits the mistakes and pressure that destroyed their lives long ago. Believing she has caused enough pain, Lan decides to leave quietly before sunrise. However, everything changes when little Ni runs toward her and begs her not to disappear again. The emotional moment forces Diep to confront the loneliness she carried throughout her childhood and the fear of repeating the same pain with her own daughter. For the first time, Diep begins seeing not only her own suffering, but also the regret and love her mother carried for decades. As the storm finally passes, the broken family slowly finds hope, forgiveness, and the chance to heal together again.